Thank you, sisters and brothers, for including me in today's discussion, and thanks to Stephen and Jeff for speaking before me and making a lot of good points. I thought I would start with the survey that Jeff talked about, where it was very clear that the respondents are completely and unambiguously understanding of the climate crisis that faces us. And I think if you went, sort of looked at the understanding of a mass of humanity in this world, that is the consciousness. The problem that we face right now is not that like 20 and 30 years ago we did, where there was an ambiguity. The science itself was still trying to come to more of an understanding of what dangers we actually face. And so if we were having this conversation 40 years ago, it would probably, scientifically speaking, have been reasonable for us to have difference of opinion on the nature of the crisis. But at this moment, there is no ambiguity in the science, and there is no ambiguity in the minds of the mass of people. Stephen said we're 7 billion people, and as a matter of fact, some of the nations and the cultures that are right now facing devastation or imminent devastation are not English-speaking countries. Many of them are maybe not even literate, but they understand the climate crisis in such an organic way that you don't need a PhD in climate science to get it. So what is the barrier? The barrier right now is not that we need to spend another 10 years educating people, and I know a lot of people think education will help. And of course, I'm a teacher, education always helps. I don't mean to knock that down. But I think we need to get to the heart of the matter. And I think Stephen also alluded to this in when he talked about tax money, the tax subsidies that are given to big corporations. And he said we need to commandeer those funds so that we can actually use it for renewable energy work and so on. I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but that's the idea that people have. I think that's a very good starting point for us to think about it. And I try to analyze why is it it shouldn't make sense. This should be an irrational situation for us to be in, where the mass of human beings are completely clear about the grave threats that stand on our doorstep, and yet we seem to be paralyzed in action. We saw Copenhagen, we saw Paris, we saw what's happening. What is the crux of this whole thing? What is the one elephant in the room that we need to pinpoint? And that is, who owns the resources that could either continue to be targeted to dig every drop of oil from the ground, or be diverted towards renewable energy work. And that's what it comes down to, my sisters and brothers. It's a question of who has control over those resources. And so we cannot have an honest and any sense meaningful discussion about climate change, let alone the strategies to fight it, unless we talk about capitalism, because capitalism ultimately is the system, global system that we live in, which has determined that the vast majority of resources should be in the hands of a very few people. Stephen mentioned Oxfam. There was another really key study that was released by Oxfam, which I am sure everybody here knows, where they said that only 62 people, number of people that can fit in a London double-decker bus, own as much wealth as half the population of the world. Half the population of the world is 3.5 billion people. This is an insane and absurd situation that we're facing, but it is not simply a question of morality or justice. It's also a question of just mathematical accounting of resources and a question of whether we can do something for climate change. And here is what I would say. 90 companies, only 90 companies, Exxon, BP, Chevron, all of these companies, only 90 companies have been responsible for 2/3 of carbon emissions since the dawning of the industrial age. Do you and I control these corporations? I don't think there's any hidden oil lobbyist in the room, but maybe there is. But the rest of us don't control. Do we actually believe that there is no action on climate change because the oil executives don't understand climate science? Then what is the reason? Why won't they move the resources to renewable energy? They have no incentive to do so. Not because they don't understand the science, not because they have a low IQ, never underestimate them. They have enough understanding to know what is going on. The problem, though, is the system itself, where if you are an oil executive, if you are a financial oligarch, you have no incentive to move towards renewable energy. And so you will come up with all kinds of rationales not to move towards it. And so for us, we who want to save the planet cannot allow ourselves to remain paralyzed in that paradigm. I mean, they may want to incinerate the planet on their way to making the highest possible profits every quarter, but we don't make those profits. We have an incentive in saving the planet. We have an incentive in providing a really decent standard of living for many generations henceforth. So what do we have to do? There are a lot of ideas about what we could do. We could tax the millionaires, as we have been saying in Socialist Alternative, my organization, tax the millionaires to fund transit and education. We could do a lot of things if we had access to the resources that big oil has access to. We don't lack the scientific and technological know-how at this moment. I know research can go on. I mean, and there's no shortage of smart research scientists to continue the research. But at this moment in time, in 2016, the barrier is not a lack of understanding on the part of a mass of human beings. The barrier is not technology or technological development. The barrier is not science to move from fossil fuel-based technology to clean, renewable energy technology. The barrier is political. It's a question of who owns resources. So my sisters and brothers, I would posit this to you all. We cannot regulate, let alone control, what we don't own. So if we are serious about combating climate change, then we have to face squarely the need for human beings, overall, working people, to have a democratic control over the massive, unimaginable resources, the trillions of dollars worth of resources in the hands of big oil, the financial oligarchs, as I said, the bondholders that are running havoc in Europe and with the standards of living there. All of this poses a political question. So the question of climate change begins as a scientific question, but ultimately, if you want to address it, it becomes a political question, inevitably. And that is one of the reasons I am a socialist, because I understand, as many others do, that under the framework of capitalism, despite the best of intentions on the part of you and me, we will not be able to transform the global economy in the way it needs to. In order to halt climate change at this moment, a lot of damage has already been done, but in order to halt climate change right now, what do we need to do? We need to first have a policy global. Not one more drop of oil is dug from the ground. We need to move away from nuclear. I know there are a lot of people who think nuclear is the solution. We need to move away from all these dangerous sources of energy and move towards clean, renewable energy. But we have no prospect, absolutely no prospect of doing that unless we talk about moving towards a different kind of global economy, and I call that socialist. Basically, it means an economy which is controlled, an economy where the resources, the massive resources that are currently in the hands of a few executives, can be brought into the democratic public ownership of ordinary working people, so that we can decide to stop this insanity and go towards actually, doing something useful. But in order to do that, it poses further questions. I see a lot of people nodding, and I'm glad to see that, but I hope the next question has popped into everybody's minds, which is, how do we do this? How do we take the resources in the hands of such a powerful lobby into democratic ownership? This is, if it does not appear completely daunting, then we are totally missing the picture. It is extremely daunting. It is going to be extremely difficult. And the only way this can be done, and it can be done, but the only way it can be done is if we have mass movements globally to begin to go towards that kind of transition of our global economy and society. And again, I don't want to leave these questions in the abstract, because it's all well and good for us to talk about it in the abstract, but unless we actually, if we have real action and potential for action, none of this is of much use. And so in the United States, especially given that we are in the presidential election here, we have to ask ourselves, how politically can we move towards building huge movements in order to challenge this status quo? And that political discussion has to include, for us as movements, as we build our movements, we cannot dissociate ourselves from political questions. I know you can call it electoral questions, whatever you choose to call it. The point is that as long as the politics of this country and of every country is controlled by Wall Street and by big corporations, by big oil, as long as politics is controlled by them, and as long as that is happening, the economy and the resources will also be controlled by them. You cannot de-link the economy from the political power and say that we're going to build economic power in a vacuum of political power. Such a thing is not possible. We cannot build economic power without building political power, and vice versa. And so for us, it's also important, hence, to think about what it means to be continuing to support the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, I think there will be a broad agreement in this room that the Republicans do not provide any sort of solution. I don't think I need to spend time convincing anybody of that. But I think the stickier question is the role played by the Democratic Party establishment. I mean, look at the Occupy movement and the activists who won some key victories on Keystone XL. They did not win those victories because Obama promised them and then he delivered. No, they won those victories because by the time the Occupy movement rolled around, it was tens, hundreds of thousands of young people who were by then completely disappointed at the lack of action by somebody they had put their faith in, not because he lacks personal characteristics, but because as long as you're beholden to the Democratic Party, that is what's going to happen. And so they organized on their own. Occupy activists and environmental activists organized on their own and got a significant victory. I wanted to talk about another victory as well, recently in Washington State, just I think a week and a half ago. Governor Jay Inslee has been billed as the greenest governor. Well, his office was behind the scenes negotiating for a large international corporation to bring the world's biggest methanol refinery to Tacoma. We just got an incredible news last week that the company has decided to permanently cancel those plans. This is a huge victory. But it did not come because of the Democrats. It came despite the fact that there was not a single politician in the legislature who had the courage to stand with the activists, and the activists won this on their own merit. These are examples. These are small examples, but critical examples that show us which way we need to go, which means that we need to build mass movements on the ground, and everybody needs to be part of it. And I want to address quickly the question of workers versus environment, but it is so appropriate that we are having this discussion on a university campus, because every era of history, historical movements has shown that young people, campus movements, play not only a catalytic, but a leadership role in shaping the movements of their era. So it is so critical, everybody here, but especially young people who are just now getting politicized. Hopefully some of you have gotten politicized around the Bernie campaign, but this is critical that we keep building our movements. But we also have to understand that our movements will remain impotent unless we also recognize that it is about building political power, and that means building our own independent political forces, fighting for an independent party of the 99%, which is completely dissociated from corporate money, which runs candidates that takes no corporate money. I ran on such a ticket, and I ran as an opposition to the Democratic Party establishment in Seattle. Everybody said it couldn't be done. I won the election. We won 15 now. Brother Jeff played a major role in the victory in the fight for 15. The labor movement was critical for that. And then, despite a lot of massive opposition from the Democratic Party establishment, we again won the re-election last year as an open socialist, as a defiant challenge to the establishment. And Bernie's rise throughout the nation, I mean, he's not going to likely win the nomination because his party's establishment is against him. I happen to run from a party that is for me. That's the difference. We need a party that is for us and not working against our candidates. That's a fundamental difference. But the point is that when we won in Seattle, everybody said, oh, well, that's Seattle, this is hippie land. Of course the socialists can win. No, that's not true. Bernie's message of a political revolution against the billionaire class, a message to really fight climate change, has struck a chord in the heartland of America. This is America. America, yes, there are some elements that are right-wing, but that is not what America is. America is a mass of young people who are angry and disgusted at corruption in politics and are looking for a left-wing alternative. And the left will have indeed failed them. The labor movement, which I'm a part of, will indeed have failed them if we didn't use this moment to organize, as Stephen and Jeff said. The last point I wanted to make is about workers. Something that we, Jeff and I, we are part of the environmental movement, but we're also part of the labor movement. And something that corporations like Shell will use, unabashedly will use is the question of workers. Well, you environmentalists are against workers because we provide workers. When Shell brought its, that polar pioneer, which I call the polar pillager, to our coast, they said it was about jobs. On the face of it, it is about jobs, and it is our duty, for those of us who are in the environmental community, first of all, it is our duty to build links with the labor movement by recognizing that it is about jobs. When people say they're concerned about their jobs, we should not scoff at that. We should actually, be in solidarity with them, because yes, we do want jobs, but we want good paying jobs, and we have to build solidarity, as Stephen said, solidarity amongst workers and young people who are fighting for environmental justice, and build that solidarity against the corporations. And I mentioned that specifically because United Steelworkers that Jeff mentioned, they were on strike a year and a half ago, and they were on strike for extremely difficult working conditions, and part of those working conditions were dangerous conditions, daily occurrences of fires, emissions, leaks, and explosions, because Tesoro will not enforce the EPA safety regulations. Just today, Seattle Times reported that the EPA has fined Tesoro refinery, that same refinery, where in 2010, 7 of their workers died because of oil-related explosions. The EPA has just fined them $720,000 because of lax safety regulations. So I think, my sisters and brothers, we can be confident in reaching out to the labor movement and saying that the corporations don't care about you today, let alone tomorrow. And furthermore, we are not going to have jobs on a dead planet. So yes, it is about jobs, but it is about decent paying jobs with decent standards of living for everybody by virtue of being a human being, as Jeff said, because this can be done in this day and age, but it requires the enormous wealth of our society to be used for decent standards of living, to be delivered in an environmentally sustainable manner, not for insatiable short-term profits of a very short-sighted and self-centered ruling class, which will take the planet with them if we let them.